Hexblast is one of the single highest damaging spells in the entire game. Not to mention, it also has one of the single highest damage effectiveness added of any spell in the game, or skill in general. Meaning that even without taking advantage of the Doom mechanic, Hexblast hits incredibly hard. Combining that with the accessibility of bow cast on crit and not being particularly finicky about the cooldown recovery rate, we are able to put together a very comfortable and fairly high damaging build without absolutely breaking the bank. What I have in the example POB that is linked below is just what I have cobbled together with what I had in standard, just so I could try it out as a proof of concept. As you will notice, I didn't even bother maxing my res without flasks or anything like that. This is just a build proof of concept that you can start putting together for about 5 to 10 divines and will reach a very comfortable amount of damage, allowing you to take on the majority of the content in the game without investing more than a few dozen divines. If you really want to take that to the next level, you can go for +1 max power charge helmet, power charge rings, Ashes of the Stars, etc. Push your crit multi as high as possible and can very comfortably hit about 25 to 30 million DPS if you want to push it that far. What we have here is just a scaffolding of something where I haven't really focused too much on the defenses, just the bare bone pieces to show you what can be done with the power of Occultist, cast on crit, and one of the highest damaging skills in the entire game. The big crux here that makes this one of the most fun feeling builds that I've played in a while is the fact that we are able to leverage increased AoE and combine that with the interaction of a Despair on hit ring, Profane Bloom, and Herald of Ash to get some of the most satisfying full screen clears and explosions I've ever experienced. So the crux of the build here is that we are building around Hexblast. As you can see, the damage numbers are absolutely ridiculous. I have an average of about 3,500 chaos damage here with a 310% effectiveness of added damage. Not to mention that since all damage can shock, ignite, and freeze, and we are hitting so hard, I am very consistently hitting 30% shocks on all non-Uber endgame bosses. If we want to leverage this even further, we can even use a Cinder Swallow urn. So what we're using is Rain of Arrows or Blast Rain here, and each Hexblast that's being triggered is doing 1.6 million DPS with my moderate configuration here that can trigger when we get enough overlaps up to 10 times a second, giving us 16.5 million DPS. Which is enough to feel very comfortable with most content in the game. For absolutely insane speed mapping around the map, you want to use Rain of Arrows, very easily leading to like a screen and a half worth of explosions, allowing you to move around the map incredibly comfortably. And as you can see, Blast Rain is a lot more concentrated, is going to really focus your single target damage. Honestly, half the time, I'm a little too lazy to even worry about switching between Blast Rain and Rain of Arrows. And since we're scaling a good amount of AoE, the Profane Bloom and Herald of Ash will really just be blowing up the whole screen anyway, to the point where Rain of Arrows is really just if you're in like a pure mapping configuration. What really makes bow cast on crit so accessible is the fact that we don't really care about too many mods on this. This was just a synth base that I happened to have. I threw Essences of Zeal for the attack speed here until I hit T1 crit multi. Then I crafted cannot roll attack modifiers, slammed with 1 exalt, gave me +1 socketed gems. Then I crafted crit chance and I'm good to go. The overall cost of this bow is really just a couple divines, super accessible. And then if you want to push it to the next level, you can go for a double damage synth base or anything like that. I just happen to have this. Ideal helmet is a Crown of the Inward Eye with Assassin's Mark Curse Effect enchant. You can go for +1 max power charge corruption if you want to push it to the next level. In this example, I have a really well-rolled elevated spell and attack crit with +1 cursed body armor. These are really easy to craft if you just want to work together a Elder and Hunter base. Suffixes can't be changed, Reforged Caster to get that +1 curse. For the budget version, I would just go for a pair of Hands of the High Templar that have attack and spell crit on their implicits there, and that'll get you going as well. If you can find one that also has Despair on hit, then you don't even have to go for a Despair on hit ring. Ideal boots are something along these lines, you know, the typical crit build, elevated, tailwind, elusive onslaught. Sorry, let me shut up that Harbinger. That is one thing to know about this build is we are using Torrent's Reclamation here. He will constantly be casting and making that annoying sound. Yeah, you'll want to unsummon him once in a while. We'll go over the belt in just a second. The budget alternative that I would go for is non-elevated Tailwind with cooldown recovery rate, and that will allow you to use non-awakened cast on critical strike support since you have a little bit of CDR on your boots, and then you can go for alternative sources of onslaught like even a Silver Flask. Like I said earlier, we can use a Cinder Swallow to get really good sustain as well as the onslaught. We really need Despair on hit for this build because we want to propagate the Profane Bloom with the Herald of Ash for the really good explosions and screen clear. So you take any eye level 80+ Hunter ring, throw it into Reforged Caster, and you'll hit this pretty darn quickly. The other ring here, I just crafted with Essence of Envy, get some increased chaos damage, and just some really good quality of life here, nothing special. For the quiver here, this is just what I had laying around. The additional arrow is not instrumental whatsoever. Just go for strike chance, crit multi, and life, and you're good to go. The +1 arrow is absolutely not necessary. Really doesn't do that much for this build. Since the way that Blast Rain and Rain of Arrows work, +1 arrow just doesn't do that much for us. So don't worry about that whatsoever. The gloves, these are just literally garbage gloves that I went for Unnerve with a little accuracy. Like I said before, some cheap Hands of the High Templar can be really, really good for just getting that crit chance and despair up. And then the belt here, this is Torrent's Reclamation. It is really, really, really good for this build. So you can summon this Harbinger here that is just, he's invincible. He's up pretty often. You have about an 80 to 90% uptime of this buff, which is 10% increased action speed, which is obviously really good for attacking, casting, and moving a lot faster. On top of that, life recovery rate, energy shield recovery rate, increased attack speed, CDR, etc. This belt is actually just really, really good for this build. And unfortunately for me, at time of making this video, Mathil did put out a build using it just a couple days ago, so the price did spike a good amount, but even still, it's only about 400 chaos. It's not that expensive, and the price is already going down as the Mathil effect is kind of subsiding. You know, maybe there'll be a little bit of a subtractive effect if people want to try this build out, but yeah, it's only a 2 to 3 divine belt, really not that expensive, and really an underutilized belt in my opinion. And this is just a corrupted one that I had in standard that has increased critical strike chance, which is just obviously really nice for this build. There's a lot of belt double corruptions that you can go for that are incredibly good. So if you have a few extra divines and you have them, this is a really good double corrupt target. And then yeah, the amulet that everyone's looking at right here, I'm not really using any alternate quality gems here at all. So the quality of skill gems really isn't doing that much. As you can see, I'm just using a regular Hexblast. So that quality is not really doing anything for us. The reservation efficiency is nice, but we can just go for a +1 all skill gems and something like Zealotry 50% efficiency. And then that'll be basically just as good for this build. And you can even go for life or anything like that. So Ash of the Stars is really not doing that much for this build. It's just what I had. Makes it a lot easier to put together a scaffold of a build very quickly, but a good rare amulet will just be significantly better, honestly, especially because we can go for crit multi and stuff like that. So with my auras here, you can see that I am using Zealotry, Vitality, Herald of Ash, Precision, and Grace. If you're fighting a big boss, you can drop Herald of Ash and use a different aura like Flesh and Stone or something like that if you want to be a little bit more defensive. I'm using Steel Skin on left click. I'm using Enduring Cry. We have Mark on Hit with Assassin's Mark here. Gives us some more damage. I am using Anomalous Assassin's Mark, which is just a little bit more damage for us. I just looked at my gems. I don't have them optimized whatsoever. I have like 3 different Enlightens right now. You could absolutely optimize this and just put them all in a 6-link right here. Like, as I said before, this is just an absolute raw scaffolding. You know, you can drop 2 of the Enlightens and just drop your Herald of Ash and you're good to go. In terms of skill tree, if you've ever seen a power charge stack and cast on crit Occultist, this will look incredibly familiar to you. We are just pathing into the spell crit right here. We are pathing towards all of the max power charges that we can get. Some more spell crit over here. I'm just using 2 Chaos Large Cluster Jewels right here. Really, the best thing probably is to drop one of them and go for double medium Cluster Jewels with Pressure Points and Quick Getaway. But this is just what I already had equipped on the build, and it was good enough. The big thing that we want to go for here is Unholy Grace. There's a bunch of prefixes that we can go for that are basically just as good. We don't really care about skill effect duration or damage over time or anything like that. As long as we have Unholy Grace here for the increased attack speed, there's a lot of alternatives that we can have on the prefixes. And then if you look at all of my small jewels, you can see that I am just trying to get some res up and some dexterity and strength. Since we are using a bow and we're using a lot of green gems, getting enough dexterity is a pain in the butt. So that's one of like the really annoying things that we're doing by going into practical application, grabbing Alacrity here, and then just trying to roll for dexterity on a lot of our gems. If all of the gear was like recrafted and perfectly set up, you would go for as much res and dexterity and strength on your gear as possible. And then you would go for jewels that give you as much critical strike multiplier as possible. The other crux here is we want to have a Militant Faith that is carved to glorify High Templar Dominus. That is because we're using Inner Conviction. We are stacking power charges. You know, this is obviously a crux of the build. I have a nice 2 mod Watcher's Eye that has evade hits while affected by Grace and critical strike multiplier while affected by Precision. This is just like a nice to have Watcher's Eye, but honestly, you could get a good base jewel that's giving you something like 30 plus crit strike multi. There's nothing absolutely crazy here. I've really been enjoying this build. If you want to push it even further, put on a Mage Blood. This will allow you to basically overcap your crit chance with like a single flask. Toss on top of that the Bottled Faith. Balancing your crit chance gets a lot easier. You can run around a little bit faster and, you know, you don't have to worry about res anymore. It's absolutely not necessary. And honestly, the build, I think if you balance your crit chance without a Mage Blood, might feel a little bit better just because Torrent's Reclamation is really that good. Other really nice thing about Mage Blood with this build is it has a lot of strength and dex on it, whereas the Torrent's Reclamation is just a stupid cloth belt. So you don't get any of that. And so Mage Blood, as we all know, makes everything a lot easier. Another thing that you can do at low budget is use increased critical strike support. This will give you a ton of critical strike chance. So this way you can put together the build even without Hands of the High Templar or a really nice critical strike chest or anything like that. I really think you can get this build going for about 5 to 10 divines. And really once you get up to about 30 or so, I think it just really comes alive. But yeah, fun little build prototype, explode the entire screen, run around really, really fast. I think I'm going to put this together as something in my back pocket that I might do next league. But yeah, what do you guys think about it? Hopefully this inspired you to maybe try something else. This build actually gave me a lot of ideas about things I want to play around with Hexblast. So definitely stay tuned and get subscribed if you want to see that. As always, huge thank you to you guys and especially all of the patrons. And I'm going to go explode a couple more maps. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you all tomorrow. Goodbye.